Great, thank you. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Jack Keene. I work for Confer, and we're an endpoint security vendor. I'll speak to you a little bit about who we are and where we come from, and then how we think about the problem. So we're about 5 years old. We spent the first 3 years in stealth. We didn't release product until about May of 2014. So we've been on the street for a couple of years now. Raised our A round through Matrix and Northridge, a couple of fairly old school VCs out on the East Coast, and then our B round was just late last year. Foundation led that round. Foundation's a VC out here on the West Coast. Thankfully, and both Northridge and Matrix doubled down and participated in the B round, which is a nice little endorsement of what we're doing. We're very grateful. We've only been on the street for a couple of years from a product perspective, but we've been able to close EDR, for the uninitiated, means endpoint detection and response. So we've been able to close the largest EDR deployment in communications and the largest EDR deployment in asset management, which we're very grateful for. So our founders looked at the market fairly pragmatically when they started the company, and you can still see a lot of what they saw then. You can still see that now, and that is that the endpoint market is fairly fragmented, and of course there are some outliers, but broadly they're basically three silos, right? So you've got your reputation folks, whether that's AV or sort of super AV. You've got the second silo being behavior-driven detection and prevention. So these are the folks that are looking at interactions between applications and the CPU, checking those behaviors against a previous breach, and if they've got a match, flagging it. And then, of course, being able to prevent, right? So killing a process or quarantining a device or ripping malware out remotely. So you've got that sort of second silo. And then your third being incident response. So the Carbon Blacks of the world, where they're giving you the full breadcrumb trail of an attack on a particular asset, absolutely necessary from a complete endpoint strategy perspective, but no proactive detection or prevention, right? So our thought was, boy, if you could take all of those three silos, collapse it into one solution, and make it operationally effective and doable, we think we'd really have something. So, of course, the fragmented approach has a couple of fairly negative ramifications. Obviously there's companies out there, huge banks, Facebook, Google, where they're building a huge infrastructure with all of their resources to do each of those different silos independently and to tie them together internally. But of course, most of our customers and most companies out there don't have those kinds of resources. And so they need something in place at the endpoint to be sort of a force multiplier, to be able to do all of those things, but without having to spend all of those human resources. So that's sort of the first ramification. Then the second being, as you take those silos and apply them to the life cycle of an attack, you can see that they apply in pockets, but not across the entire attack as an attacker is living in the network and gaining more and more access to their final goal. And the little example we've shown here is, it starts with, in some cases, some spear phishing to gain initial credentials through someone's account, and then setting up a base of operations, whether that's in a DMZ or somewhere else, to begin capturing additional assets. And then moving laterally throughout systems to gain control of various assets, to then low and slow pull assets out, and then a final attack. You don't see a lot of prevention and detection until the final end of that kill chain, right? So our approach is really led today by two primary functions. On the one side, it's that behavior-driven detection and prevention. So it's not just that interaction between applications that I spoke of, but it's also anomalous detection or anomaly awareness, right? So we'll see when, for example, someone gains control over an asset, leverages PowerShell to, say, start scraping memory, and then goes to exfiltrate that data through, like, Calculator to some remote IP address. Well, we'll see as a normal course of doing business that that's not what Calculator normally does, right? They don't normally communicate to some remote IP to exfiltrate data. So we'll catch that from an anomaly perspective. That, in combination with our behavior matching, has really driven our efficacy, and it has sort of won the day in a lot of testing that we've done. Then part two is that we take all that detection data and we store it in our instance that sits up in AWS. And that allows our customers to search against that data set to say, okay, which of my other assets have this piece of malware sitting on it? Or which of my other assets have spoken to that bad IP range? Or maybe which of my other assets have uninstalled a particular application that is required amongst my assets? And so the combination of having those two things is something that's fairly unique in the EDR space, and what has won us the day so far. Of course, you'll see a lot of vendors in our space highlight that they're lightweight. Nobody's winning deals because they're lightweight. Certainly a few are losing because they're heavy, right? And so to that end, these are kind of table stakes, and you'll see us be less than 1% of the CPU, less than 1% of the disk I/O. We're not going to move more than 3 megs of traffic a day off of any given asset, because we have to be instrumented to be just that lightweight. And then, as I mentioned, the back end of all of this, we define an endpoint as a desktop, a server, a mobile device, all of those sensors connecting back to our instance that sits up in AWS, so our customers don't have to deploy anything on site, no databases to maintain, no servers to keep up, and that's that. Thank you very much.